Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Scott Hinson. I am the CTO of Pecan Street. Pecan Street is a 501c3 nonprofit based here in Austin, Texas. We collect energy usage data, but we don't depend on utility systems to do it. So we get from about 700 homes nationwide, 10 billion records a day on how people are using and producing energy, which gives us some insights into all sorts of things that are happening on the distribution system and within the home for advanced sort of energy systems, electric vehicles, solar, those sorts of things. I thought before we even get to introductions, just so that we can sort of level set the room here, that I'd ask a few questions of the audience. You didn't know you were getting audience participation, but you are, and the door's closed, so you can't leave. Who here has trained an artificial neural network? Okay. Who here has used ChatGPT? Who here got a good answer at a ChatGPT? More than I expected, because my answer stunk. Of course, I was asking questions that were really hard. And who here has programs that they're actively using some form of AI, ML, deep learning, whatever you want to call it? Okay. That's about what I expected, except for the ChatGPT. That really did take me by surprise. My answer was really bad. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, starting right here. And then we'll head down and we'll go into a few questions, and then we'll go into some audience questions, as is the usual format for these sorts of things.
Thank you, Scott. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Venkat Tirupati. I'm a Senior Director, Grid and Market Solutions Group at ERCOT. For those of you who don't know ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas, we are the grid and the market operator of Texas. Thanks.
I'm John Miri. I'm the president of the Electric Grid Cybersecurity Alliance, and I started that in November, but prior to that was Chief Administrative Officer at LCRA, which is a wholesale power and water utility here in Austin. Venkat and I used to work together there. So some of the examples and stories I'll draw on are from that experience as well. I'm glad to be here.
It's on? Okay, good. So hi, Steve Smith. I'm with Smart Energy Water, or SEW, and I've been working with utilities for over 20 years and love working with utilities, mostly because of the people. Just honest, good, hardworking, well-meaning people that are trying to just make life better for their neighbors. And I'm blessed where I live in Spokane, Washington. 3 of my neighbors work for Avista. And on our Facebook group, whenever there's an outage, I don't need outage prediction, because at least outage response, because all we do is go on the Facebook group. We talk to Tom, and Tom tells us when things are going to go and pop back on, and tells us not to worry. So it's really nice. But SEW is a provider of SaaS solutions, mostly centered around worker experience and customer experience. But it's all powered by ML and AI-based technologies. So we're excited to be part of this panel here.
So you had, in sort of the prep emails that were going around, you had mentioned some things that you wanted to point out on some differences between AI and ML and all these various buzzwords. Do you want to go into that real fast?
Sure. I mean, AI, we've all known about AI forever. I mean, back even when the movie War Games came out, that was a version of AI and machine learning, how it taught itself to play tic-tac-toe really fast, and how it almost took over the world. So I thought that was pretty cool back then. But how it's morphed into today. I mean, AI is the latest buzzword. ChatGPT got released, and suddenly my son was getting A's on his English essays somehow. I don't know. So, and I've looked into it, and I've had great results with ChatGPT from prepping for this, I did type. tell me about the convergence of AI and outage prediction in electric utilities. And it was amazing. It was really good. And if you need an executive summary for, to take to a board, it's really, really good. And, but it doesn't go very deep. And so if you're looking, if you're doing hard questions, you want to take, peel away the layers of the onion, it's not that good yet. But a lot of people are mistaking AI for machine learning, for expert systems that are combining really good algorithms with, just putting things through its paces. And it's really important to understand that not everything that the news and TV are calling AI is really AI, because there's no human decision-making, capabilities into it. It's just learning from big groups of data and bringing in historical data. So,
John, do you want to talk about some of the things that you've implemented so far?
Sure. So
Some of the success stories, because we just ragged on ChatGPT for getting stuff on.
yeah, sure. So and I'll add a bit to, I think that was a great intro. I'll add a bit to the definition as well. So there's a distinction I want to make when I say we've implemented AI applications, and we did 3 at LCRA that were in different areas I'll mention. One was outage prediction. So there's a distinction between artificial general intelligence and artificial specialized intelligence. The artificial general intelligence is like HAL 9000, ask it a question and it has a sort of mind of its own. We're not there yet. We didn't implement that at LCRA. Artificial special intelligence is really more specialized problems. So large learning models like ChatGPT are one of them. There's 8 or 9 sort of major kind of types of machine learning. So one that we used in 3 different contexts is called unsupervised learning, unsupervised machine learning. And it's, if you've seen some of those examples where you don't tell, the idea is you don't pre-program it with the rules. You give it kind of an objective and tell it what's good and what's bad, and say, I want less of what's bad and more of what's good. And then here's a data set. Now just go to town. And so 2 of the models we used were on cybersecurity, one on our OT networks and one on our IT networks. And the purpose there, I'll touch on them just real briefly because it's a little separate from this, but the purpose there was to monitor things, to find things that are not known as bad, but to say, hey, we're noticing an aberration. This is a behavior that doesn't seem, this is new. So Bob usually doesn't do a whole lot on the weekend, and suddenly Bob just downloaded the entire engineering database. Something's probably wrong. That's an anomaly. So the idea on the cybersecurity side was to use unsupervised machine learning to say what it's learning is your normal patterns and then alerting you on anything that deviates from it. So the outage prediction one's a little different. And so what that does is it sits basically next to the control system. It sucks in all the control point, all the information that goes into the control system in parallel. It has a sense of what you give it you do give it some instructions about objectives of saying, well, what's good outcomes and what's bad outcomes. And then over time, as it starts to build those models, it starts prompting the human operators to say, there's a thing that you don't like to have happen, and there's some precursors to that you don't seem to be concerned about, but they're happening again. Is this something you want to act on? And it doesn't replace, there's nothing, in none of the systems can any of those systems make decisions autonomously without human intervention. They're all advising a human being. But on the outage prediction side, it has been very effective, and it has kind of been able to say, hey, we've noticed some patterns that a piece of equipment is about to fail or something bad's about to happen that have actually saved money or helped avoid an outage. So,
John, let me ask a question on that. What actionable intelligence, or what form does that actionable intelligence come out as when you hit go, start on the program? What form does that actionable intelligence take? Is it, do you have to do anything special, or is it a regular report, or what does that look like?
Sure. So one of the advantages of looking at control system data is that the user interface for the results is pretty simple. So it doesn't, in a sense, our control system operators are used to seeing large amounts of data anyway. So really all they end up getting is I think something bad is about to happen. Here's the data that makes me think that. And then the human kind of takes over at that point and says, okay, what do I make of this?
I can probably elaborate a little bit more on that, John. So what we have is different, it's basically an anomaly detection algorithm. And then we have dead bands for different kinds of data. So it can be as simple as a yellow, a green, a yellow, a red, and then it's a flashing red, right? So we have stuff like that where we have dead bands for different kinds of data. And then the operators who are watching it are visualizing it that way.
I had a chance a couple of years ago to meet Ray Kurzweil, the guy at Google who wrote the Singularity, and I either wasted or was efficient in using my opportunity to ask him a question to see what he thought about applying AI to power plants. And one of the things he pointed out was that the nice thing about it is, as much as, and I say this with respect to everyone who does it, the problem is much simpler and it's much more constrained than languages, right? Like it's a very linear, very logical system, and it's finite. And so it's easy to use much less sophisticated AI to get a good result than you could on, writing an essay. So it gave us some confidence to say, hey, we can use this.
So can you talk about in those applications, the amount of data it took to train said algorithms, whether they were detection based or there was actually sort of the traditional feedback loops. And I bring this up, and I'm gonna tell the story because I did for our work, we do relatively little on the AI ML side for our electricity data. We're starting to do some of the event detection work that you're talking about, because when you have as many distributed systems as we do, there's always a number of them offline. It's just unavoidable. And but most of the AI ML work that I've done is in agriculture. We were part of an accelerator program, and what we were trying to do was build a proxy model for a piece of software that is very, very difficult for farmers to run. And we thought, okay, if we can build a proxy model that runs significantly faster and is significantly easier to work, because you basically needed a degree in computer science to compile the repo from that came down from Colorado State, we could actually make drastic differences into their economic outcomes and things like that. And it got to the point where we were training on data sets of 500,000 to 1 million runs of this software. And if you ran that software on a laptop, that took 5 minutes per run. Now, we were running it in the cloud, right? So we just spun up more Amazon instances and just rang up the bill on poor McGovern Foundation. But this one of the things that makes these types of models and these algorithms so powerful is having that underlying data. Can you talk about that challenge? Because it's literally always a challenge.
So I'll touch on that, and Venkat may have to add. So one of the other nice things, if I don't think these systems that we're talking about have any personality, but if they did, they would be happy, because with power plants, with historians and in our industry, like with the historians that we've got in place, we're tracking so much historical data for so long, and it's in such a nice, clean, normalized electronic format that you can actually train the model up very quickly just off your historical data, because you've got so much of it around. Now, it still took a few months, I would say, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I think it still took a few months before anyone sort of felt like there was something useful coming out of it. But it got there pretty quickly. What were you thinking?
That's right, John. What we did initially was to start off with a pilot for a specific power plant. We started off with data from a specific unit. And it's about 5,000 tags. The data is coming from SCADA, getting into the historian, and then this AI tool was using that. And as with any tool, garbage in, garbage out. So initially we had to do some data manipulation to make sure that the data was good. And then, as John said, ultimately it was pretty easy because our historian had decent data, and it was just a matter of feeding that data into the system, and we got the results that we were looking for.
Well, Venkat, you might be good. I'm curious. What internal systems is your outage prediction touching, and then what external systems is it touching to get this information?
The input to the system, again, I'm no longer with LCR, I'm with ERCOT now, but at least I remember, if I remember. There's plant SCADA, and then there is the historian at each plant. So the data from the plant SCADA would get to the historian, and from the historian would feed that data into the system.
What historical data is it getting? Is it gathering weather, just usage? Is it gathering
about
data, GIS data? What?
No. It's really plant specific data, Steve. So about 4,500 to 5,000 tags. Pressure, temperature, vibration, air, inlet, outlet, right? So
I think that's what's really would be of interest to people, is because what are all the inputs that are giving you good actionable intelligence, as opposed to, oh well, we know that this piece of equipment lasts about 15 years. So at 15 years we ought to replace it, but it could be running great, or it could have conked out 5 years ago.
So that's a good example of kind of where this type of system gives you a little bit better value than other things you've got. So when you're dealing with your power plant, right, there's signatures of, there's signatures that start to tell you something's about to happen. Now, one level, which has been traditional, is you just use time, right? So the manufacturer says, hey, every 15 years you should do this, every 5 years you do, every 3 months do this. So you can sort of just put that time, you can plan it, put it into your system and say, okay, on every month we're going to go do these things. Better than that, or in addition to that, you've got your 40-year employees who are more like Scotty on the enterprise, who are like, I know it says that in the book, but she's listing a little to the left. I think this is what this means. And so, you got that. This is almost a supplement of that kind of thing. And we're not pulling in any other wacky data sets, like, even weather, like is kind of out there. It's just kind of saying, this is starting to, these pieces of equipment are starting to heat up or use more than they do, or start up slower than they expected. And that's not usually good.
So Venkat, can you tell us sort of what you're doing on the ERCOT side of things? No, take off that LCRA hat.
I mean, for those of you who know ERCOT or ISOs in general, right? I mean, we are really a data organization. We don't really own any assets. We get lots of information. Information is coming from the transmission service providers. It's coming from the generating units, and it's coming at 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 10 seconds. So just lots of data. And the way we are defining, Scott, internally is, the taxonomy that we are using for data science within ERCOT is descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. And for the descriptive part, it's mostly about visualizing and looking at all the different kinds of data that we are getting. And it's mostly dashboard, situational awareness for our operators, things of that nature. But our focus is really on the predictive part right now. We get lots of data. And as you all know, forecasting is really, really important for an organization like ERCOT in terms of the weather forecasting, in terms of the demand forecasting, in terms of the variable renewable sources forecasting. And with the changing grid, forecasting is really becoming really important, and we want to be very precise with that. So there's a lot of emphasis that's going on the sort of the predictive piece.
It's predictions also getting harder and harder. Let's, we've talked about the data collection side of things. Can you talk a little bit about the trust issues, the supervisory sort of, this system has now given you an answer. What do your organizations do to sort of check that, validate it, and then move on to the action? Because you can generate all the data you want, unless it becomes actionable, it's worthless, right?
So you're touching on something important there, because in the beginning of any, and we saw this across all three of the projects that I mentioned, is in the beginning, you have the whole organization has a healthy, maybe excessive bias towards skepticism about all the answers that come out, until you start shifting to a maybe less healthy unskepticism, because it's starting to look like it's good. And
then it oscillates back to where.
Yeah, then you find your equilibrium. But I think it's important to kind of, from a management and leadership standpoint, to kind of help coach the teams through both of those things to say, yeah, we want you to check this out and don't believe what you just see the first few results. You're going to get some garbage in the beginning because it's new, but don't kill this idea just because it was wrong the first 4 times, because it's going to probably get better. But I think you've got to kind of keep people thinking to say, at the end of the day, don't just trust the system to make this decision. You've got to look at that data just like you would otherwise. Let it alert you, but don't lose that decision making. And ultimately, that becomes a management challenge, because if you don't capture that, I think what you'll find is you'll put the system in, you'll get better as you know, and then when you start over trusting it, you're going to start making mistakes and go back to, you know, some of the bad old days before you had the system. So it really takes a lot of kind of constant vigilance. And you see this in employee safety and other areas too. The safer and safer we make products. I don't know if anyone likes car racing, but you know, every time there's a major accident, you get 17 new safety features in car racing. And then what do? They go 20 miles an hour faster and get 2 inches closer to the wall. We've got to sort of resist that urge to say, now that the system is better, I could just take more risk. So it's a tough management challenge. It's just human challenge.
Well, Scott, I think your question really helps delineate the difference between AI and expert systems versus, you know, machine learning systems. That, you know, and then John elaborated on the answer, which, you know, it really involves trust, the ability for an AI or software to make a human level decision, and the substitution for that human level decision in oversight. And at what point do we trust that? And at what point do you say, oh, it's running on the AI works great, we've been doing it for X number of months, years, whatever, I trust that. And that's really the crux of that decision there. So right now you have a huge expert system or machine learning system, that has algorithms and spitting out data based on the data that the garbage in, and is it producing garbage out, or is it giving you something that's really actionable and valuable? And then are you trusting it to then give you a recommendation? And then are you trusting it to not only give you a recommendation, but make a decision on that? So, for example, in outage prediction, it says, well, you need to do vegetative management in this area. And are you allowing it then to schedule a work crew to go to that area without having a supervisor involved in that? Are you allowing it to schedule asset replacement and place the orders, schedule the crews, do all that, put all that in motion without that type of oversight? That's the next leap to AI. That's the true AI, making those human level decisions. And I don't think we're there yet. I mean, you just talked about your skepticism, and utility organization skepticism. You're going to have that guy who's been there 40 years, so I'm not going to trust software, all that kind of stuff.
I think you're right. It doesn't need to just be a little bit better to start trusting it. It needs to be like an order of magnitude better. And on the cybersecurity side, the two systems we used on the IT and the OT networks, there are other customers that have deployed them, other customers of those same companies that have deployed them in self-managing autonomous modes where they let them, if you see this bad behavior, shut this IP address down. I'm not ready to do that yet. I think it's, I want to see that it's significantly safer for significantly better decisions for a very long period of time.
Well, you just talked about preventative measures. So you see something bad happen, you shut it down. Well, that's erring on the side of caution. That makes a total sense. You see, oh, this could be a hacker. This could be someone who just stole my identity and they racked up $5,000 at Nordstrom's. Well, Steve doesn't go to Nordstrom's. Steve doesn't spend $5,000 on clothing. That's a huge red flag for the bank. That's easy to red flag. But what about the positive? And that's where we got to get to, is when we start trusting the positive, and we can empower the AI to make first little simple decisions and then bigger and bigger and bigger and all that.
Has anybody here seen the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver on AI ML? Anybody watch that one? It just came out. One of his examples in there, and I'd seen this before, was for skin cancer detection. They gave it a bunch of images, and then all of a sudden it was detecting walnuts as cancerous, as skin cancer, because what they had really trained was that if there's a ruler in the picture, because the dermatologists were handing over pictures that had rulers in them to show the thing. And so really they had done ruler detection in their images. Personally, for the soils work that we did, there is no way those final models I had, they were way better than the first ones, but there was no way that I would turn over those final models that we had for farmers to make planting and crop decisions that would be decade-long impacts to their soil quality, because there was just way too much question in our minds around the validity of what we were seeing, right? There was just way too much. So one of the outputs that we were trying to do was to give people this tool, and we didn't release it because we didn't think it was the right thing to do. And I'm no AI ethicist, and that's a very specialized field, but it was just, we were like, nope, not going to do it. So that brings us to, when we are looking at these sorts of tools, what benefits are we wanting to get, right? And what are the benefits we want to get next? So for like your usage prediction, your load prediction algorithms, like what does that roadmap look like for you guys? Where are you trying to get to here?
I mean, that's a easy one, Scott, in the sense that, we are measuring the error, in the sense that, I'm predicting something. Now I know what my actual number is. I know what my error is, and we are trying to get there. So for some of the use cases, it's sort of, very easy to do. But yeah, there are some tough use cases. For example, forced outage detection. We talked about outage detection. For a company like ERCOT, I don't have all the asset level information that asset owner has, but I am getting some information, in a timely manner from the asset owners. And if I'm trying to do an outage prediction, it's really tough for me, right? So there are situations like that where some use cases lend themselves very, to easy solutions, and some are really hard to do.
So I think the benefits that we saw on AI for outage prediction really fits into a happy type of outcome that I think a lot of us are hoping to see, which is that it's not replacing human jobs. It's not saying, okay, well, we're going to take away this thing that the people used to do and let the computer do it better. It's really supporting and augmenting that to say the benefits haven't been headcount reduction or staff time reduction. The benefits have been outage reduction, right? So it's better availability, better uptime. We really started, in the last few summers, as the grid was getting, tighter and tighter in balance, right? Saying we don't want to lose 1 hour. So what do we need to do? I think you're getting your benefits in that kind of area. And if you manage the strategy and the policy side of it, right, to have, to kind of position it the right way, you're going to get those benefits. And I think it was also important to us to make sure that the team that worked on it understood those were the benefits we were going for, that they're part of the team too. And we're not trying, it's not adversarial where it's, we're trying to go, train the computer to do your job. We want this to be added into the mix so that the team can do better in the next thing that it's doing and have more interesting work. One place where, this is outside of our industry, one place where very autonomous decisions are being made, no one's life depends on it, but is the, now most of the large insurance companies, if you have a roof claim, it's AI that decides whether you get paid or not. And think about and even that's not actually replacing a lot of human jobs. Who used to do it? Well, there's the roof contractors would get up and do an estimate. Obviously they were a little biased, but they found that it's cheaper and easier to just let the computer decide. Now that's just a financial decision. That's not something that, has life and death, like, electric, service, but yeah, so.
No, you have, utilities, it is life and death for some people who are hooked up to certain machines. They depend on, different machines at night. Power tends to go out at the worst possible time. It isn't like, oh, it's 3 PM, it's still light out. It's a balmy 70 degrees outside. It's great. No, I'm good for a few days without power like this. This is great. No, it goes out at 2 in the morning and you don't realize it's out until either you wake up and it's burning hot in your house because the AC's on, or the AC didn't kick on because it's 100 degrees outside. I lived in Houston and it never dipped below 90 for 6 months. Or it's so cold out there. You wake up and even though you got 3 quilts, you're freezing, because the heat didn't turn on. So and then you've got people that are hooked up to life-saving machines in their homes. And I had a boss who, she told me that they lived out on an island off the coast, around Nantucket, and they, the fire department knew about them and knew that if they needed to get certain help or the power went off, they were triaged higher. The fire department knew all that, so they did all that. And so with utilities, yeah, I mean, it's not like your roof; it's life and death for some people, and and then you factor in the costs of what's the cost of doing nothing. Well, we've seen with PG&E what the cost is of. I don't want to say they did nothing. That's not right to say, but the public perception is that they did nothing. So what's the cost of the public perception of a utility nowadays doing nothing or being perceived to do nothing? And so that not only goes from predictive maintenance or the predictive outages, but how are you communicating with people on what you're doing to prevent outages or at least mitigate an outage? Because people are reasonable. They know that the power is going to go out. If a tree falls on a line right in front of your house, you don't expect the power to come on. We're all reasonable. But what's being done, and what's being publicly said to be able to mitigate that? And so the cost of doing nothing, what is that? Is that worth the investments that it takes to implement better outage prediction, invest in that technology, invest in the training, invest in creating that trust with your employees as well as with the public?
So we're getting close to question time. Could I get each of you to mention something that I didn't get to in the questions or that you haven't gotten to that you really want to get to? Go for it.
I'm good.
You're good. No, seriously. Okay.
I'll jump in. So AI is, we're going to hear about AI a ton. I kind of talked about this at the beginning, but we're going to hear about it a ton over this next year. I wouldn't be surprised that that's the term of the year. Come December, something dealing with AI. And a lot of things are going to be attributed to AI that are not AI. There may be small flavors or sections of it, but we are getting to that and it's getting better. The modeling and the software and the technology is getting better. But it's still fair to have a good amount of skepticism, as John mentioned, in it, and have a lot of oversight because it is life and death. Now, where it can be implemented really easily and really well are a lot of customer-facing solutions. So AI-based chat models, AI-based voice models, when people call in, and being able to deflect, do call deflection and things like that in a customer-centric model or a customer-centric interface. That's where it makes a lot of sense to really, if you say, well, we want to invest X amount of dollars over this next year into some sort of technology, something customer-facing that's not life and death. I can pay my bill via a chatbot. Great. And if it fails, well, then I call an 800 number. It's not life and death.
I'll throw in a tip that was, I think, I figured everybody was doing, and I think they didn't. So with each of the companies that we implemented, before we finished implementing, we did a series of meetings with each of them where we had our team, and especially architect level folks, so the leadership type folks within technology team and architects, and we really said, we're not expecting you to give away your secret sauce. Obviously, you have a product and a source code, and we're not asking for the secret sauce. But what we do want to do is do a couple workshops where you explain, what machine learning, what algorithms are you using? How do they work? How can they make good decisions? How could they be fooled? And the reason I bring it up was, they were very productive conversations because we learned a lot, and we felt kind of better and more comfortable as users. The other reason I bring it up is that all three companies were sort of confused by the request, meaning like, I don't think that
Really?
happens a lot.
Nobody
Yeah,
asked them
no
that
one.
before.
Yeah, they were, and none of them were. I thought they'd be hesitant, like, well, I don't want to tell you. And they're like, they actually were kind of excited. They're like, we want to tell you how it works. No one asks us this. So I would say, spend some extra time to do that because there's failure patterns, there's things that can go wrong, there's biases and get introduced and all those things. And so when you've got this new tool, take that extra time to kind of have them kick it around and say, we want you to teach us how this works so that we make the right decisions with it.
Cool. All right. So now I'm going to open it up for audience questions. I'm assuming there are some. Please let there be some. Okay. You had your hand up first.
Surgeon, he was telling me that in a room with some recent grads, they're great as long as the machines are working. But if something goes wrong, they don't have the fundamental knowledge and experience that like this generation does. And so I guess my concern or my thought is when you talk about this up and coming AI, and I do believe it's where we're going, it is going to be like the first most common like way of going about it, right? But how is there discussion about keeping the students and the up and coming professionals engaged and knowledgeable enough to recognize and to be able to step in at the level that we do now without, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, yeah, and it like, is this, because I feel like it needs to be addressed, right? Like, you don't have an airplane company without talking about when the planes are gonna be delayed, how it does, the customer, it's a full circle thought. I was just curious if that comes up.
So I'll throw a few comments on that. And I think that's a great insight. That doesn't come up as much as it should. We're excited about the new stuff. And so the new stuff gets out there and we implement it. And that's good because, it brings a lot of value. I think both from a cultural and a leadership standpoint, it's important to have those types of conversations. When I took, I didn't major in computer science, but I took a few classes. And I remember hating this one professor that made us build this very simple computer from like the chip level and program it in this 2-digit hexadecimal. I mean, it was just, I complained every single day. I was like, this is the most useless thing in the world. And then I realized like 5 years later that just having been forced to sort of see how you do it without the advanced tools was a hugely important, exercise. So I think that's one thing I'd encourage people to do is to say, let's practice a world without some of these tools. Let's know which tools we can live without for a period of time, which ones we can't. There's some set of tools that could be disabled that you just have to stop. But on the other hand, how can we live without them? The other piece I think that's really important from a culture and leadership standpoint is you'll have a small number of really key employees, especially who've been around for a long time. And we don't spend enough time celebrating the knowledge and that type of employee. I've heard a lot of comments and they're always well-meaning, but inadvertently destructive, where someone would say, well, Bob or Susie here, they've been here for 40 years. They have all this really great knowledge and we love them so much, but we really have to get that knowledge out of their head and get it down onto paper and get it automated because we can't depend on Bob and Susie being around here all the time. Well, first of all, what did you just say to Bob and Susie? And second, what did you just say to the future Bobs and Susies? And who said, like, you always need great experts in your organization. You always need those long-term people who have the intuition and the knowledge to go put that stuff together. And so we should celebrate that as much as we celebrate the new, advanced stuff and encourage that to say, look, the human being is part of this equation. And if we implement more automation on the boring stuff that people really don't want to do, then that gives us more opportunities to have people doing that thoughtful, intuitive, expert kind of work. So you're right on. That's something we need more discussion about, I think, in this whole field is there's the new tools, but then there's, ways to sort of not lose the human side of it.
Well, and maybe a slightly different take on your question is, do we still program in ones and zeros? No, we haven't for decades. Nobody programs in ones and zeros anymore. I started out in computer science.
Unless your professor's mean.
Unless your professor really hates you a lot, yes. No, when I started out in computer science, and my professor would talk about how when he was going and getting his CS degree, how they had to have everything perfect before they sent it to Berkeley to be compiled, because that was the only computer available at the time in the whole Western states to actually compile the program that he was working on. And if they made one mistake, it would cost the university like $80,000 in phone charges, because it would just keep going and going and going and going. But now, with the computers I was using and the programs I was using, I could compile every other line. And it was fine because it was all local on the machine. And so if I made a mistake, it would tell me and I would correct it and move forward. And he would go on and on about how lucky we were to do that. And so the point is that the tool set is changing. And not just AI, but with everything else that we're doing, the tool sets are changing. And yes, we need those experts, those long-term experts who have that institutional knowledge to say, yes, this will work, no, this won't work, and why it won't work. But are still open to saying, well, no, there's a new tool set out there and maybe this will work. But if Bob or Susie's saying, oh, no, it won't work because this is the way we've always done it, well, then maybe it's time to show them the door. So,
All right, next question.
Hi, Frankie McDermott from SMUD in Sacramento. I think we're aging ourselves on the programming because I actually enjoyed programming in '88.
Yeah, this is turning into the uphill both ways. Sorry
about that.
I'm so old that
Experienced storm season like we never seen before, from December 31st to about the 16th. I was talking to Steve earlier about this. And I'm wondering, has anybody, Martin, cracked the code on using analytics? This may be just simple analytics and not machine learning or anything. But taking the profile or the results of prior storms and trying to, the core issue is we can't tell our customers with any degree of accuracy their estimated restoration time. We're kind of throwing darts and using a mallet rather than a needle.
Austin residents have experience with that recently too.
Spoken to probably 20 either COOs or CEOs or VPs of store managers across the country, and everybody's struggling with the same thing. And it comes from customer expectations that are very reasonable, like, tell me when the power's going to be back on. So do you know of any cases, or any of you have been involved in using the demographics of your system, the health of your system, how a fuse outage or another transformer outage information can help you with some certainty in the future?
I have not seen anything like that, but it's a great question because now I want to go find out. Because I think you're right. That's a fantastic use case.
define some certainty.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not hard to do better.
Then it's very certain. And the irony is, if you go to our outage map all year long, it's very accurate. Customers love it. But during a storm, the conditions change, and we actually turn it off.
Yeah.
And many utilities do that.
Right.
So some sense of, so we're speeding up damage assessment. We're trying to do that.
So
We want to give ERTs, or some people call them ETRs, prior to that damage assessment being finished by some sort of analytics.
I can tell you, I don't know of commercial systems that are doing what you want to do, but I can tell you that the DOE has put out research programs that are sort of on this topic or adjacent to this topic. They have a number of efforts in the previous year's FOA that we're asking. So you're not alone, and the DOE has recognized it and put somewhere on the order of about $35–40 million into researching that. Who got those grants? We bid sort of a subset of it with our data, but we weren't selected. So I don't know where that headed.
My take on that is really, you need the data, right? You need to have historical information for you to predict the future. If you had one event like this, which never happened in the past, any model that you build, you're not going to get the answer. So, we sort of experienced, something similar recently there in terms of, our weather, our load prediction. And so no matter simple or fancy tool, data is really important. And, the more data you collect, and, the use case that you talked about, when I think about it, there are so many exogenous things that you need to put together to come up with that answer. And you need good data to put all that together. So I think data is really, really important.
where is the first place that you think AI will make an impact in the grid today, in terms of outages or recovery or planning?
I think from my perspective, it's not an accident that we started with outage prediction within the power plant environment, only because it's as hard of a problem as that is, it's so much more closed and finite and logical. I think that's probably the first place. Scott mentioned the other, sorry, Steve mentioned the other top. I think the other end to start on is that customer experience side, because it's kind of lower stakes. But I think that middle piece, I mean, getting a little to Frankie's question, I think is really where the benefits are much higher. I mean, if you can get down to simulating weather and grid and distribution lines and that, I mean, that stuff, that would just be amazing. So I think the starting points are kind of on the two ends, and maybe work towards the middle.
I think it's a wee bit of a race across multiple things. We're actually doing a program right now with University of Michigan where they're using slow thermostatic load, so air conditioning, to follow frequency regulation signals. But to do that, you have to have amazing prediction on whether or not that air conditioner is about to turn on, about to turn off, and how long you can hold it before you think somebody's going to notice. And so they have done tremendous work on those models. So I'm not sure where it's going to pop out, besides where but the huge aha sort of this is it. I suspect it's buried into a bunch of things right now that we aren't aware of.
From a vendor's point of view, to answer that question, AI, if someone comes to you and says, oh, we've got a true AI and we're going to solve all your outage problems today, just walk away. Because my job is to say yes to just about everything, and then let the engineers figure it out. But I'll tell you, they're blowing smoke. It's not true. Now, the versions that are correct, if someone says, well, we've got a machine learning model that takes all your data, is able to pool it, aggregate it, dissect it, and give you actionable intelligence, then absolutely. That's today. We've been able to do that for a while. And I've seen other solutions that have been able to do it for almost a decade with varying degrees. And it's just going to get better and better and better the more data you can incorporate into it.
Yeah, from a ISO perspective, I mean, I like both ends, John, in the sense that from a demand and supply side, right? I would love for utilities to do better prediction of outages so that, I don't have to take a very, very conservative stance in the way we run the grid. I would love for demand response to exist at the customer side so that, we can account that into the picture as well. So both sides do matter.
All right. Well, that was it. We're at time. I'm sorry.